Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
2 Palestinian hunger strikers near death as Israel postpones appeal decision. Bahrainis rally against King Hamad's constitutional reforms. And Pakistani Taliban claims responsibility for suicide bombing in Bajur. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
The head of the Palestinian Prisoners Society's legal unit, lawyer Jawad Boulos, said the Israeli Supreme Court has postponed issuing a decision on the 2 appeals presented by 2 prisoners on hunger strike, Bilal Diab and Sa'ir Halahla.
After prisoners Bilal Diab and Sa'ir Halahla entered their 68th day of their open-ended hunger strike, a hearing was held in the so-called Israeli Supreme Court, where their trial was indefinitely postponed to review their demand to be released.
Bilal fainted during the trial. On the judge's orders, I was asked to examine him since I'm a doctor. The prison authorities and the Nachshon unit rejected the judge's decision twice. Only the third time, and after the judge and the court were extremely embarrassed, was I allowed to enter to examine Bilal. His body temperature was very low.
The Prisoners Society and the Jerusalem's Prisoners Families Committee held a sit-in in front of the court before the trial began to send a message to the occupation's administration that despite the ban on sit-ins, they insist on standing in solidarity with the prisoners who are fighting the battle of empty stomachs in the occupation's prisons.
These 2 prisoners presented the greatest image and the most courageous heroism in defense of our prisoners in captivity. A large number of our detainees are taking part in this hunger strike in the prisons. We call on all forces and international courts to stand by our prisoners.
It is the Supreme Court of Injustice that was belittled today by the power and determination of the 2 prisoners, Sa'ir Halahla and Bilal Diab. And even though the occupation's authorities prevented us from entering and holding our sit-in in the corridors of the court, we held our own sit-in at the entrance of this court.
During the session, Bilal and Sa'ir's attorney presented an argument to the judge in condemnation of the so-called policy of administrative detention that allows the detention of the prisoners without any charges. Also during the session, detained Sa'ir Halahla addressed the judge despite his deteriorating health condition, asking for a doctor to examine him as he seemed to be near death. He also asked the judge a question, saying that throughout his 22 months of detention, his case has not been investigated, and no charges have been levied against him, asking under what basis his detention continues.
The
history of this court has taught us that neither justice and fairness nor equity can come out of it. We come here to raise our voices, the same way we do in front of the world, in front of their judiciary, in front of all those who should hear the cries of people being detained for no reason and with impunity for the Israelis.
As for prisoner Bilal Diab, he fainted during the session. Member of the Knesset, Dr. Ahmad al-Tibi, requested the judge to allow him to immediately examine Bilal. The Shin Bet's so-called security service rejected the request 3 consecutive times. He was finally allowed to examine him after the judge allowed it. Al-Tibi said Diab is in very poor health. Sa'ir Halahla and Bilal Diab chose hunger over humiliation as the path to a dignified death, without subservience or subordination to the occupation that is only familiar with injustice and tyranny, even in its courts that claim to be just. Salwa al-Shakra, Palestine TV, Occupied Jerusalem.
And now to Bahrain, where people there have held new protests, this time to reject political reforms recently offered by the regime of King Hamad. Now, the protesters have chanted slogans calling for his downfall in the capital, Manama, and elsewhere. The king has announced a series of reforms which would give more power to Bahraini lawmakers. The reforms will enable the MPs to impeach some cabinet members, but they spare the longtime Prime Minister Khalifa bin Salman, who has governed Bahrain with an iron fist for 4 decades. The revolution in the small Persian Gulf kingdom began early last year. The Hamad regime has harshly cracked down on the uprising, killing many since then. Well, protesters have taken to the streets across Jordan, slamming the country's peace treaty with Israel and denouncing corruption in the kingdom.
We are going out to protest the Treaty of Wadi Araba. We want the Israeli embassy in Amman closed. We want normalization with the Zionist entity ended, and we want the Treaty of Wadi Araba annulled.
The protesters burned the Israeli flag during the rallies, and they called for the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador from Amman and the closure of its embassy. They also demanded serious reforms to the political system. Organizers say the demonstrations were in direct response to the recent appointment of Fayez al-Taraneh as the new premier. Taraneh was a key player in getting the 18-year-old Wadi Araba treaty signed. Now, protesters say the 1994 accord with Israel is a failure and must be abandoned. And now to Yemen, where tens of thousands of Yemenis have rallied in the capital, Sana'a, chanting the revolution that ousted the former regime is not over. The protesters demanded that the members of the country's former regime be purged from top military posts. A year of popular uprising in the country led to former ruler Ali Abdullah Saleh's handover of power to Abd Rabbu Mansur Hadi in a single candidate vote backed by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. However, several of Saleh's loyalists and relatives are still hanging on to key military posts. And now to Lebanon, where a military judge has charged 21 people with smuggling weapons intended to be used for terrorist acts. Now, this days after the Lebanese army stopped the ship that was believed to have been smuggling weapons to armed groups in Syria. 14 of the defendants are in custody. Now, the ship was carrying heavy machine guns, shells, rockets, rocket launchers, and other explosives. The crew members come from different nationalities, including Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, and Libya. Syria has been gripped by violence for more than a year now. Thousands of people have been killed during the unrest. The opposition blames the government for the bloodshed, but Damascus says foreign-backed armed gangs are behind the violence. Well, Iraq's fugitive vice president al-Hashemi has accused the Iraqi judiciary system of lacking the principles of justice. Al-Hashemi made the accusation at a press conference in the Turkish city of Istanbul. Well, he also said that he would not return to Baghdad because the charges against him are politically motivated. Al-Hashemi is accused of running death squads against political and security officials across Iraq. The first session of al-Hashemi's trial was held in absentia on Thursday, and the next session is slated for May the 10th. Al-Hashemi fled to Kurdish-run northern Iraq and then to Turkey after an arrest warrant was issued against him last December.
Three Turkish soldiers were killed and 2 policemen were injured by Kurdish gunmen in 2 separate attacks in eastern Turkey. Local security sources said gunmen attacked a military patrol unit in a rural area in Tunceli in the eastern part of the country. In a separate attack, the same sources reported that gunmen attacked a police car with machine guns and injured 2 of its members in the region of Sirnak. At least 20 people were killed and 45 others were wounded when a suicide bomber blew himself up. He targeted a police checkpoint in northwestern Pakistan. Among the dead were a number of policemen and civilians.
This is the result of attacks by armed groups in Pakistan. Their operations made a strong comeback despite campaigns against them by the Pakistani army and security. A man wearing an explosive belt targeted a market in Bajur, leading to the killing and injury of dozens of people. Bajur is a tribal area located near the border with Afghanistan. In the past few years, the Pakistani army has waged wide-scale attacks there against the Pakistani Taliban movement that is tied to al-Qaeda. Pakistani medical sources confirm that among the dead are 5 policemen.
The number of deaths is increasing because of the serious injuries. Among them are a local security commander, his deputy, a high-ranking officer, and at least 5 policemen.
The Pakistani police sealed off the site of the attack while the Taliban movement claimed responsibility for it. Bajur is one of the fiercest battlefields against the Pakistani Taliban. Gunmen linked to the Pakistani Taliban and al-Qaeda usually target security forces and policemen in this area, which is located in the northwestern part of the country. This attack is the 3rd in 2 days in Bajur. On Thursday, 2 explosions killed 5 people, including 2 pro-government elders and security elements. Across the country, around 5,000 people have been killed in more than 530 attacks waged by the Pakistani Taliban's gunmen in the past 5 years.
Over 20 people were injured in confrontations between the Egyptian security forces and protesters attempting to reach the headquarters of the Defense Ministry in Cairo. Our Al Jazeera correspondent reported that 20 armored trucks amassed in al-Abbasiyya Square after pushing the protesters away from the surroundings of the Defense Ministry. A number of political parties announced a rejection to the attempts to storm the Defense Ministry and warned of its ramifications on the general security and political scenes in Egypt.
It is an inflamed Friday in Cairo, with near-repetitive scenes and different parties trading accusations amid a charged political atmosphere ahead of the approaching presidential elections. The platform of the confrontations is al-Abbasiyya Square, that has been on fire for many days. It began with a sit-in organized by the supporters of Hazem Salah Abu Ismail, the candidate that was disqualified by the High Elections Commission. During the sit-in, the protesters attempted to approach the headquarters of the Defense Ministry. Clashes then broke out between the protesters and individuals described as thugs and some al-Abbasiyya residents who were active in the popular committees. Similar to the other neighborhoods of Cairo, 9 people were killed a few days ago. Another version of the story says they were killed by thugs, or those described as the regime's remnants. On the other hand, the military council is accused of negligence and of deliberately allowing the situation to deteriorate in al-Abbasiyya Square. Those who make that claim say the military council is trying to postpone the presidential elections. The military council responded by denying the accusations and is warning against approaching the Defense Ministry's headquarters, saying it would react by defending the ministry by virtue of military honor. In between the hours that separated the military council's warnings and the launch of today's demonstrations, mixed positions were expressed. Tahrir Square hosted a demonstration against the military council, and so did al-Abbasiyya Square that received even more protesters. The Abbasiyya Square protesters are no longer limited to supporters of Abu Ismail. Most Egyptian political parties were quick to announce their rejection of the attempts to reach the Defense Ministry's headquarters and warned of the consequences. However, it seems their voices have not reached al-Abbasiyya Square, or the protesters who chose to clash with the security forces in their attempt to break through the multiple barriers around the ministry's building. Amid the fresh bloodshed, the calls for calm have been ignored. At the very least, it is likely for the security tension to continue, in addition to the heated political tension only days before the presidential elections.
Joining us from al-Abbasiyya to brief us on the latest developments is our Al Jazeera correspondent Mahmoud Hussein. Mahmoud, how would you describe what is happening now?
What is happening now is that the seesaw operations are ongoing. Several minutes ago, 2 armoured trucks came from the direction of Ramsey Street to disperse the protesters. The remaining protesters are now at Al-Nur Mosque.
آخر قالت لجان التنسيق المحلية المعارضة في سوريا إن 25 شخصا سقطوا اليوم.
The Syrian opposition's local coordination committees said 25 people were killed today by the gunfire of security forces in the army in Homs, Aleppo and Jabal al-Zawiya. Activists said an entire family comprised of a couple and their child was killed by gunfire in a residential neighbourhood of Aleppo between Thursday night and Friday morning. This comes as demonstrations broke out in many parts of Syria in response to a call by the opposition that titled this Friday's protests, "Our sincerity is our salvation."
Since the early morning, different opposition groups started to document reports of killings by the gunfire of the Syrian army and security forces as observers were visiting the cities of Idlib and Marat al-Naman.
Even the possibility of communicating with them is nearly impossible because of the heavy security deployment, and the observers are accompanied by security forces and their shabiha.
Opposition activists accused the Syrian authorities of opening fire at a number of demonstrations that came out on a Friday named "The Friday of Our Sincerity is Our Salvation." Many parts of the country witnessed these protests. From the Kurdish province of al-Hashemi, where dissidents have continued their peaceful demonstrations during the many long months of the uprising, to the towns and villages of Idlib province that are witnessing intensified security campaigns by government forces, which say they are pursuing gunmen. Similar demonstrations were held in the towns and villages of Daraa. Protesters in the city of Da'el carried banners in solidarity with the students of Aleppo University and other slogans criticizing the performance of the international observers. Protests were also held in the countryside of Aleppo and the countryside of Hama. The demonstrations in the neighborhoods of Homs were characterized by massive crowds. Protesters chanted slogans calling for the downfall of the regime. As for the capital, Damascus, activists reported gunfire and killings by the security forces in the neighborhood of Al-Tadamun, in addition to ongoing house raids and arrest campaigns targeting activists. Similar scenes were witnessed across the countryside of Damascus, where the deployment of the army and security forces was increased. Wa'il Hajar, BBC.
In our top story, it appears as if September 4th will be the date set for the country's next general elections. Coalition Chairman Ze'ev Elkin submitted a bill last night to dissolve the Knesset, which will be put to a vote next week. Here to fill us in on the latest political developments is IBA's Eli Wall-Galanter. Eli?
Thank you, Laura. With that bill submitted last night to dissolve the Knesset, it's now only a matter of days before it all becomes official. Here's how next week will look. On Sunday, the Ministerial Committee on Legislation is expected to approve the bill. On Monday, the bill will be put to a preliminary Knesset vote. On Tuesday, the bill's first, second, and third and final readings are likely to take place. And then the 18th Knesset is expected to convene for the last time on Wednesday, during which its final legislation will be approved. And with that, we'll be on our way to national elections. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is meeting with coalition party leaders this week, even as he sits Shiva for his father, in an attempt to find a compromise on the date for the vote. Most sources in the Knesset advocate September 4th as the election date, and that seems to be the frontrunner. Netanyahu will announce the date when he returns to official duties on Sunday. In the meantime, we already have 3 polls predicting how the electorate will vote, and the results are nearly identical. As you can see, the Jerusalem Post, Ma'ariv, and Dachaf Institute polls all have Likud winning 31 seats, Labour coming in second with 17 or 18, Yisrael Beitenu with 12 or 13, Yair Lapid's new Yesh Atid party gaining 11 or 12 seats, and Kadima, which is currently the largest party in the Knesset with 28 seats, dropping to 5th with 10 or 11 seats. Now, how these numbers will play out when Netanyahu forms the next government, we'll take a look at that in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, there's one other unexpected result of the early election. The Tal law, which exempts the ultra-Orthodox from being drafted and which is likely to be the center campaign platform of several parties, will be automatically extended if the Knesset is not in session. It's set to expire on July 31st, but will not be canceled until after a new government is formed following the election. But that can take up to 100 days after the vote, so the Tal law will remain intact for at least 6 months from now and up to 8. Laura?
Thanks, Ellie. Here in Jerusalem, voters express skepticism that early elections can bring any significant change about, while analysts say the decision to call for the early balloting was only a matter of time.
I feel like the whole world is looking for change, and there's upcoming elections in the U.S. and France, and now possibly in Israel. For me, I think it'll be a day off from work, so I'm looking forward to that, but I don't know that it'll change the direction of the country in any significant way.
Nothing dramatic will happen after the elections because we still have the same politicians that have no courage to do the right steps.
The key for the timing of the election was in the hands of Netanyahu, and the long he would have waited, he would be more constrained in terms of timing. So he decided that this is the right timing. Most of the indicators at this time show that he's right, but there are 4 to 5 months until the elections, and things can change. So we can never know whether he did the right decision or not. But I think he used his power to make the decision.
The body of IDF soldier Netta Brand, who went missing Wednesday, was discovered this morning near Beit Shemesh. Brand was found shot to death with his army-issued rifle laying next to him. Military police have launched an investigation into the incident and will transfer their findings to the IDF Legal Division for further examination. The soldier, who served in the Givati Brigade, left his home yesterday morning and was last seen near the entrance of Givat Yeshayahu, south of Beit Shemesh. His family said they found a suicide note in his belongings, and there was growing concern that he would try to harm himself. The police, IDF, and a number of volunteers searched for Brand for hours before finding his body. Chagai Amir, the brother of Yigal Amir, the assassin of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, will be released from prison tomorrow morning. Amir will be completing a 16-and-a-half-year sentence for conspiring to murder Rabin and for threatening the life of Ariel Sharon when he was Prime Minister in 2006. Throughout his jail term, Amir has shared very little regarding his post-prison plans. He reportedly expressed lack of remorse for the Rabin assassination, telling his lawyers this week that he did the right thing and that he saved Jewish lives by stopping another Oslo Accords. His brother Yigal is serving a life sentence.
In Iran, 2 months after the first round of elections was held and resulted in conservatives taking over the Shura Council, Iranians cast their ballots today in the runoff election to select the 65 remaining seats in the 290-member legislative body. The polling took place in 23 electoral districts, most notably Tehran, where candidates are competing for 25 parliamentary seats. Among the competing parties are the United Front of Conservatives, which includes opponents of President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and the Steadfast Front, which includes both Ahmadinejad's supporters and opponents, as well as some reformists. Joining us directly from Tehran is our correspondent Reda Al-Basha. Reda, how was the voter turnout in this second round of elections?
محمد منذ الصباح عندما كنا في مراكز الاقتراع الإيرانية لم نشاهد إقبالا جماهيريا على
Mohammed, the voter turnout across Iranian polling stations has been low since this morning, just like the first round of the elections that were held 2 months ago. I believe the low popular turnout in this second round of the elections has something to do with the economic hardship witnessed in the country, especially in the past 2 months amid the soaring inflation rates. This was reflected on the Iranian street that expressed its dissatisfaction with the government's performance and its policies. I believe this dissatisfaction was more evident today in the polling stations that witnessed a low turnout as the second round of legislative elections kicked off.
Reda, when will the election results be announced, and do you have any initial thoughts on their outcome?
Mohammed, as I mentioned earlier, the economic policy adopted by President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and his government will likely influence the results of the parliamentary election, and particularly the second round. As shown at the polling stations, the Iranian street seems to be leaning toward electing parliament members who are opposed to President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, especially those who questioned many of Ahmadinejad's ministers or issued no confidence votes against others. I believe that Ahmadinejad's opponents are in a better position to win, especially amid the ailing economic policy of the current Iranian government.
How important are these elections for overall Iranian policy and the future of its president, Ahmadinejad?
As far as Iranian foreign policy is concerned, I believe that Iran is trying to use these elections as a bargaining chip during its talks with the Group of 6 nations in Istanbul, just like it did with the first round of elections. As we all know, Iran is scheduled to hold talks with the Group of 6 in Baghdad in a few days. I believe this round of elections will play an important role in the negotiations, just like the first round did. As for the internal Iranian policy, the election results will be reflected in one way or another on Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's government. If the president is lucky and the majority of the elected candidates are among his supporters, this will be a victory for Ahmadinejad, marking the beginning of a new phase for his government, which is facing strong criticism from the current Iranian parliament.
Red Al-Basha, our correspondent from Tehran, thank you very much.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.